How rich was the Philippines in the 1930s? The footage you're seeing isn't Tokyo, Hong Kong, or Shanghai in the 1930s. It's Manila, the same city that today is often criticized for its traffic, overcrowding, and aging infrastructure. But nearly a century ago, Manila painted a very different picture. Streetcars rolled through busy avenues, department stores lined Escolta, elegant theaters, banks, and government buildings stood as symbols of a growing capital. American cars filled the streets, and ships from around the world crowded Manila Bay. So what actually happened? Was the Philippines really one of Asia's wealthiest economies? To find out, we need to look past the old footages and look into the country's economy during the 1930s. What was driving its wealth? Where was the money coming from? And by the standards of the 1930s, just how rich the Philippines was. To understand why the Philippines looked so prosperous in the 1930s, we first have to understand where the country stood at the time. The Philippines wasn't an independent nation yet. It was an American Commonwealth preparing for independence after more than 3 decades under U.S. administration. That relationship shaped almost every part of the country's economy. Unlike most of its Asian neighbors, the Philippines enjoyed preferential access to the American market. Many of the Philippines' biggest exports, including sugar, coconut products, tobacco, and abaca, could enter the United States with little to no tariffs, giving Filipino exporters privileged access to one of the world's largest consumer markets. As trade expanded, money flowed into plantations, ports, banks, railways, and businesses. Manila emerged as one of Southeast Asia's leading commercial centers, while industries tied to exports continued to expand. Even the Great Depression, which devastated economies around the world, did not hit the Philippines as hard as many of its neighbors. Its special trading relationship with the United States helped cushion the economy, allowing many of its major exports to continue reaching American markets. But this prosperity came with a catch. The Philippine economy had become heavily reliant on the United States, and by the mid-1930s, the vast majority of the country's exports were heavily dependent in the American market. That relationship fueled years of economic growth, but it also meant the Philippines became increasingly dependent on policies and decisions made in Washington. It was this unique position that made this period what many would later remember as one of the Philippines' most prosperous periods. By this point, the numbers suggest that the Philippines was doing very well. The Philippines was exporting millions of dollars worth of goods every year, maintaining a healthy trade surplus and building one of the stronger economies in Southeast Asia. But that raises the important question. Did ordinary Filipinos actually feel that prosperity? Well, the answer is slightly more complicated. The capital showcased the country's economic progress, but it wasn't an accurate reflection of how most Filipinos lived. Because outside the major cities, many families still relied on farming for their livelihood. Electricity, paved roads, and modern public services were way less common than in Manila. And daily life was still centered around quiet local communities rather than massive urban centers like Manila. So, did ordinary Filipinos feel rich? For most, it was probably not. While the Philippines was prospering as a nation, much of that wealth was generated through its export industries and commercial centers. For millions of Filipinos, life was still defined by daily hard work, lower incomes, and were mostly living rural life. And by 1939, nearly 70% of employed Filipinos were still working in agriculture, a reminder that despite the country's growing economy, the Philippines still remained a very rural country. If there was one place that best represented the Philippines' wealth and prosperity in the 1930s, it was Manila. At the heart of the city was Escolta, often remembered for its bustling streets, traffic, and businesses, which only stretched for more than half a kilometer. It had become the country's financial and commercial center, lined with banks, department stores, luxury shops, cinemas, and some of the most modern buildings in the Philippines. To many visitors, Manila looked like a city that was rising to rival major global cities. Electric streetcars carried passengers across the capital, and automobiles shared the roads with horse-drawn calisas, a city caught between 2 eras of transportation, yet was seen as efficient at the time. And Manila Bay was one of Asia's busiest ports, in which connected the Philippines to markets across the Pacific. The city's skyline was changing as well. The growth of Manila could be seen almost everywhere. New office buildings, banks, hotels, and commercial establishments continued to reshape Manila, reflecting a capital that was becoming increasingly modern and connected to the global economy. But perhaps the biggest gap wasn't between Manila and other cities around the world. It was between Manila and much of the rest of the Philippines. While people in Escolta shopped for imported goods and watched the latest films in elegant theaters, like we mentioned earlier, most Filipinos still lived in rural communities where agriculture remained the backbone of everyday life. In many ways, Manila offered a glimpse of what the country's economic success could look like. It was modern, busy, and increasingly connected to the world, but it represented only one part of the Philippine story. In the end, most evidence showed that the Philippines was indeed one of the more wealthier countries in Asia. It was the world's bigger exporter of coconuts and abaca, and had a higher literacy rate that was higher than its neighbors. One of the few countries in Asia that is often stated as more wealthier than the Philippines was Japan, who was a massive industrial giant, had better infrastructure, and had nearly 4 times the population of the Philippines at the time, sitting at just around 16 million, while Japan was at 64 million. But another reason why the Philippines ranked so high in Asia was because most countries in Asia were still poor or lacked industries or had an ongoing war that was destroying their infrastructure and preventing economic activity. China, for example, was still having an ongoing civil war, along with having a war with Japan, which limited economic growth. Many Middle Eastern countries still hadn't had an oil boom that made them extremely wealthy yet, and which would only happen decades later. And South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore technically still didn't exist yet as independent countries, so it helped make the Philippines look even more rich as a nation. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate dropping a like as well as subscribing to this channel, since this is actually my first video here. Anyways, I'll see you in the next episode.